see if I can turn it on again. So
It's on now.
It's on now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's hope we keep this one. But most of us are here, so that's good. So this is a Reading Plato Spring 2020 Mondays group.
Wednesday.
Week 4, the other side of things. Okay. So this week, I want to do, as we always start with a little exercise, something that you can sort of think about and practice at home, and just sort of starting to get your mind's eye turned around to look at the forms. So, you know, again, I say in this course, we do go through a lot of stuff, but really the main part of what you're doing is to reflect on these big issues, as Mira said, exactly what is 2, so things like that, or what is 1. Okay, so I'll just start with that stuff now, and then we'll go to the reading, and I'll take us through an account of that, my account of that, and you can just see if that fits in with yours, and if you've got any questions about that, or you think there was anything that I left out. And then we can discuss some of the issues that came up in the reading. Okay, and you could probably put me on speaker view because I might show a few slides at some point. So I don't know whether anyone already is doing that, but it does help if I've got the slides, I think. All right, so you remember how I found that the cup that I know is entirely in my experience. Yes, it's in my experience, yet I don't cause it to exist. And even though I found it to be entirely within my experience, you seem to be able to see it too. So, how's that? This is the first conundrum of philosophy, but it gets worse. You see, what we're trying to do is ground our knowledge somehow. So let's try another way. Let's try to define the meaning of the word cup. So let's just start by saying, well, here's a cup, but is this a cup? Right, is that a cup? Oh, that looks like a classic cup, doesn't it? But is that a cup? I don't know. Or I've got something else. Is that a cup? Well, I'll reserve my judgment. Or is this a cup? Okay, so we've got various things there. So we would perhaps like to define the concept of a cup, or the definition of what is a cup and what isn't a cup. So does anyone want to throw a definition forward for me? Just anything will do. It's no trick here.
A receptacle for containing water, perhaps a food, some sort of substance.
Okay, a receptacle for containing water. Anyone else want to give something?
Well, it would be a receptacle for drinking water rather than just containing it.
Okay.
I would say, to be more specific, to drink from.
Okay, are you happy with that, Achilles? That qualification of your definition.
It's closer to what I think.
But why water? Why not any liquid?
I was thinking, yes. Oh, no, I said a sub.
Oh.
Okay, receptacle for drinking liquid. That sounds great. Okay, so if we say those words, receptacle for drinking liquid, what's a receptacle? Does someone want to define receptacle?
Substance, a means of
sorry, I missed that, Achilles. Do you want to just unmute again?
containment, a means of containment.
Okay, a receptacle is a means of containment. So what exactly does containment mean? I'm not sure what containment means. Can you help me out with that?
Keeping something together.
Keeping something together. Okay, what does together mean? So we're just doing the exercise. I think you can see where this is.
Are you creating dialogue there, Bernie?
I think we can. We're getting the idea anyway. So I'll just share the screen now, and we'll just have something to look at a bit here. Let me see. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I just copied in a definition. I take your definition. It's pretty cool that it's reciprocal for containing drinks or drinking liquid or something. So, but here's some definitions that just came off the internet dictionary. So, okay, so the definition, as we could see, goes on and on. We define the words with other words, and then those words need definition as well. It seems that there is actually no end. And the words snake through the dictionary and eventually, in fact, loop back up on themselves. You start using words that you've already tried to define in your definition. We might say that it ends, you know, like another way to go is you say, well, okay, you know, of course we know that, but the definition ends with, you know, like the solid cup itself. But remember, this is in my experience. We are not getting out to some objective cup where we can ground our knowledge. My experience, the cup in my experience, might be an illusion. I might be hallucinating. So there's no ground there. And we have the same issue, of course, with concepts. Like we remember we started with Plato's concept of justice. Perhaps justice has something to, perhaps justice has something to do with fairness. But what does fairness mean? Perhaps it's to do with something to do with equality. But what does equality mean? And it goes on and on. Eventually the definition becomes circular. Word definitions find no ground. And so it doesn't matter if we're Euthyphro back 2,400 years ago trying to define piety, or if we're here and now, the problem remains. And also notice something about word definitions, or notice something about words. The cup, justice, these words are arbitrary. There's no particular reason why one word is associated with a thing, a class of things, or a concept. In other languages, other words are used. But we could use any word so long as we all agreed. We could make up a code or build an entirely secret coded language. So long as we all knew it, it would work just as well. And the same goes at the next level down. Letters and sounds. Consider these letters, H, P, and Y, and the sounds they make, h, p, and y. Well, that's the sounds in English. In Greek, of course, they make different sounds, or something like that, but I'm not Greek. Hey, you're supposed to have, I don't want to hear the laughter, you're supposed to have your... Yeah, so, okay, so in Greek they make different sounds, which I perhaps can't make. And in English they make different sounds, but we could use any letters to signify. It is arbitrary. There's nothing particular about these letters that connect them with the sounds. Now, here what we're talking about is the form of what's called a sign, right? Which has the signifier and the signified. Okay, so the signifier is the letter and the signified is the sound. And all codes have this. And the code of language, the code of letters, and then the code of language uses signification in this way. The letter signs the sound, just like the green on the traffic light signals go. Okay, it's that sort of thing. And we can think of lots of signs like that. Again, this is arbitrary. Other colors or other notation could tell us how to stop and go, whether to stop and go, whatever the signal we're desiring to communicate, so long as we all know what it is. In fact, the sign is a really good way of working with knowledge. In fact, it's a very good way of communicating knowledge. But the point in Platonism is that it's not the elementary form of knowledge. And there's no grounding for knowledge here, because word definitions work like signs. They go from words to meanings, in other words, and then to meanings, meaningful words beyond that, and keep going on. From signifier, the word, to the signified, which is the meaning. But the signified is also another word. Justice means fairness, but what does fairness mean? Equality. But what does equality mean? Signify, signifier, signifier. It just keeps going and eventually goes around in circles. There's no ground for knowledge. So, is there another way of grounding knowledge? And this is where mirror comes in. Finally, let's look at numbers. Remember how we considered the number 2? Where is it? In what way does it exist? Now, I'll just move on to the next slide. Okay. So in what way does it exist? Yeah, so now how would we define the number 2? After doing all this thinking about it, how would we define it? Well, we've been kind of saying that, excuse me, we've been kind of saying that it's two-ness. It's the form of 2, to use the Platonic term. But what does that mean? Now, look at all these 2s here, right? I got the 2 justice statues there. I got the 2 scores there. I've got the Roman numeral 2 there, which is interesting. And I've got these 2 eggs there, if you like, and 2 figures of men, and so on. I don't know which ones you can see, but there's the kangaroo sign, and so on. So all of these express the number 2, or participate in the number 2, as we will call it a bit later today. So, in fact, there is no definition that can be said. There is only a showing. I can show you 2. Look, there's 2, there's 2, there's 2. I can show you 2. In fact, and then I could say, well, how do you know what I mean? Do you see what I mean? And how do you know what I mean? And how do I know you know what I mean? Well, now I could ask you, show me 2. Can someone who I can see just for the exercise show me 2 things, 2 anything at all? I can't see everyone, but okay, I've got Eleni. She's got 2 markers of some sort, 2 pens. Okay, so I reckon, because I told her to show me 2, that she knows what 2 means. And that's all you can really do in Platonism. Is it enough? Well, it might be. Imagine doing this with a child. It's the sort of thing you might do with a child, to introduce a child to numbers, and you would perhaps play a little game like we've just played. Or perhaps you would do this when you're teaching someone the concept of 2, or what the word 2 means in English when they don't know English at all. They might know 2 in their language, but they don't know it in English. You can show them in this way. No definition. Now consider this a bit more. Firstly, notice that unlike signs, the relation of 2 things to 2 is non-arbitrary. Remember the signs with the letters? They could make any sound at all, so long as we all agreed. Here, the relationship between the 2, all the different examples of 2 here, and the concept of 2 is non-arbitrary. If I had 3 things, that doesn't show me 2. Only two things shows me two. And think of other sorts of communication that's non-arbitrary, like signs. Representation in science and in art is non-arbitrary. These two men here resemble, don't resemble lions or cups, they resemble men. When we have these road signs, which we see more and more, that use symbols rather than signs, the kangaroo resembles what it's warning about. There's no letters and there's no letters here at all. There's no signs here at all except a symbol. And then think of representational art as well. So as opposed to abstract art, representational art is representing, in this case, horses and a chariot and chariot rider. So they're not representing an egg or a stone or a statue of justice. There is a resemblance there. Now, think, how is the resemblance between these sorts of things? So the sign of the kangaroo and kangaroos, representational art, like, for example, the picture I see of you and you yourself. The picture I see of you on my screen is not you, but it represents you and resembles you. Now, how is it different with numbers? The resemblance of 2 to the form of 2 is different because what it resembles is invisible. What it resembles, 2 in itself, is entirely insensible. Think about that. It sounds crazy, yet perhaps it makes sense. 2 things resemble the form of 2, which is no particular 2 things. Now remember, in Platonism, they say the essence of things is like the essence of number. So this might show how knowledge is grounded in general, according to Plato. This actually is a very ordinary, everyday way of mysticism in Plato. The grounding of knowledge in something that is entirely insensible, entirely unseen, unable to touch, something that is immediate and insensible, but somehow participates in the world in the sense in which we would take in divine, like the gods. So to summarize, the definition of a word goes on and on like signifier to signified, unless we refer to a particular sensible object. But this is only in my senses. Numbers are different. Numbers resemble their invisible form. So today we're going to go deeper into the forms, and we're kind of going to use these kind of concepts in the background as we discuss the dialogue today. But I'm really interested to see if you have any reflections on this stuff about representation and signs and symbols and all that sort of stuff. So I'll stop there and I'll unshare the screen. And yeah, so has anyone got any comments or reflections on that? Can you see how words and their meanings are like signs, like green means stop? And can you see how that's different from particular numbers of things and the number itself? That's really the main thing to think about. It's not so much to kind of get that really solid at the moment, but to take it away and have a bit of a think about it. Does everyone know what I mean, or am I confusing you?
Yes.
So you'd say, sorry, Mira.
Okay, Ta. You said numbers. I get the definitions of words and go on and on and on, and that numbers resemble their invisible form. But So when you've got two objects, are you saying that the number, the actual number 2, represents those two objects, but the actual number 2 is a nothing? It's just a way it's something that we give to the two of us, knowing that the two we're giving the two objects a name. No.
Okay, so the two objects are an example. How does this work? The two objects are an example of two. You know that language we use. What's an example of a family? My family is an example of a family. What's an example of a computer? Here's an example of computer. There's lots of computers, but here's an example of a computer. So two things is an example of two. In their particular nature, it's not. So say I've got two particular books. Two's got nothing to do with books, has it? Two's got nothing to do with, that's not what we're talking about when we're saying that two books are an example of two. So do you see, is example a good way of talking for you, Mira?
Then I'm trying to work out what the invisible form is that numbers resemble.
No, numbers are like the number 2 is the invisible form, absolute 2 in itself. So when Plato talks about absolute justice, absolute beauty, and all this, it's often really hard to kind of get, well, what the hell, because some people, often when it's taught, and it's taught through the Aristotelian understanding, which is actually, completely bonkers, people have this idea that, there are these two worlds, right? There's the visible world, and then there's this kind of heaven. And the form of the cup, the ideal cup is sitting up there, right? And the ideal horse is sitting up there. And maybe for thousands and thousands of years, the ideal computer was sitting up there until a computer was invented, or whatever like that. So it's not like that, right? It's a bit like how mathematics develops itself, but we don't need to worry about that. The way mathematics is behind physics. Physics has to be mathematical in the modern world. Otherwise, we have a problem with it. That's one way of thinking about it, okay? But what we're saying here is that two things express two. You can, and whenever you show me two things, even though I haven't seen them before, I don't even know what they are. I know that they're two. And this is the nature of the forms. So if you understand this nature of number, then as the dogma says, the dogma of Platonism says, the essence of things is like the essence of number, then you're starting to understand where we're heading, where we say, actually, everything, the essence of all your sensible experience is these immediately known forms.
Go for it. So when we describe something, before you were mentioning the computer, this is totally arbitrary. What you're saying is, well, yes, this is an example of a computer. But when we're talking about the numbers, we're talking about something that's written in a law, or it's hard and fast. There's nothing other than that. This is just the numbers 2, as opposed to. Is that what you're saying?
And the forms are like that. The formal construction of your experience comes back to that. So, I mean, yeah.
How can you prove it's 2?
Well, exactly. You can't prove it's 2. And this is a point. And this was a problem. And this is a problem that this is actually the point at which there is a gulf between Platonic mysticism and, say, Aristotelian ways of thinking by using language and thinking that everything can be fully said, like that you can divine 2 in words, and then you can pin it down in that way. But we're abandoning that. We're saying, because we say we don't need it, because we all know what 2 is, and I know that if you know what 2 is, because Eleni just held up 2 of something. I said hold up 2, and she held up 2. I reckon she knows what 2 is. That's enough. That's enough for us. we can move on from there. Okay, but people are afraid. See, people are afraid, and Aristotle actually said this. I don't want to ground all concrete reality in this kind of mystical, insensible forms. So he said there must be form and there must be matter, right? And so you apply the form to the matter, and things come into being. So, and Plato and the Pythagoreans before them said, no, it's not like that. But it's pretty crazy. It's still pretty crazy, but that's okay. If it sounds crazy, it's okay. You're probably getting the idea. But it's, you know, to get what's good now, and after this class maybe, is go away and just get the notion, think about signs and what signs are and how signs work in meaning and how it just goes on forever. Think about that. And then think about how it's different when you say that two things are an example of two, to use that. Or as Jim was saying in the earlier class, you know, that you can have any example of circle. You can say, oh, that wheel on that car is not circular, it's not going very well, or it is circular, it's going very smoothly, or whatever. Or there's a circle made of wood. You might make a circle out of something that you've never seen before, but you know it's a circle. And so in the same way, geometry and number, in the same way, there are these forms. Now the circle in itself is no particular circle. Okay, is there any one more question maybe? And we'll, you know, like, I'm probably just repeating myself here, and maybe it's not helping.
Well, wasn't Aristotle kind of right in some of his criticisms of the forms? Isn't the forms kind of an idea that wasn't fully formulated? That it kind of works with mathematics and abstract ideas like that, but when he's trying to apply it to kind of real objects, it kind of goes a bit crazy.
Well, that's right. That's certainly the Aristotelian. That's certainly the Aristotelian view, right? But obviously, it's not the Platonic view. Yeah. I suppose, Jim, also, if you do know a little bit about this, I'll just throw it in because you might know a bit about this. What I'm one way of interpreting Plato is to say that he got to the Republic developing Socrates' theory of forms, and then by the Parmenides, he abandoned it completely. So in my view, actually, he didn't abandon it completely, he advanced it. Okay. He didn't abandon the theory of forms at that point. If he ever had this idea that I was talking about earlier, where there's these ideal cups and these ideal horses sitting up there in this heaven, just all waiting to be, you know, like molds for the casting, then he certainly abandoned that. There's a couple of times very early on where he uses that sort of ideal. But yeah, he abandoned that. But anyway, that's probably a bit beyond us. So look, we might just dive into the reading because time's getting on. And if you've got any further questions about that, there'll be plenty of time at the end to chat. So, okay, so let's go. So last week, remember, we found that philosophy is about detachment from passions and desires. Okay, and so remember there was this very strong distinction between mind and body. And so it was detachment from the passions and desires and from attachment to your sensible experience. It might be sensible pleasures and the cycle of pleasure and pain, which he was pointing to early in the dialogue. So, detachment from sensible objects and noticing that they are transient, whereas the soul moves towards being and the being of the forms. Now later on he'll use these terms being and becoming, if you like, changing. So there's the world of changing, the sensible changing world, and then the soul wants to move towards and turn around and look at the ideal forms, which are being, and in the sense of being unchanging, in a particular way that they're unchanging. We might say again that 2 doesn't change, whether it's in my idea or if it's in Achilles' idea, or perhaps in some other way it exists. Maybe we're all gone, perhaps 2 still exists in some sense. Okay, so we continue on the theme of immortality of the soul, which actually continues right through the dialogue. And as we continue through with that, various different concepts and ideas come up. So you can pay attention on the different levels. You can pay attention totally to the argument of immortality, which we might well find wanting. And then you can also pay attention to the particular philosophical concepts that come up. And a couple of them will come up today. So Plato has explained that philosophy is a preparation for death. But how do we know that the soul survives death? After it leaves the body, it might survive in the sense of breath survives or smoke survives, but it dissipates. What Seebe's wants to know is whether psyche, the soul or psyche, survives with some sort of power or intelligence. So around page 70C, Socrates introduces the ancient tradition of reincarnation. Reincarnation, where the soul goes through the underworld and then re-enters bodies to be born again. He sets out to prove this by proof that our psyche is born from the dead. Near the end of page 70, there's this quick shift into the theory of generation by opposites. If something becomes greater, then it does so from smaller. If something becomes smaller, then it does so from greater, weaker from stronger, slower from quicker. Now we can discuss this later, and we will discuss this at length next week. But let's just consider it in terms of binary alteration. Now, I'm not entirely clear why we're not entirely clear at this stage why the generations of things is binary, but this is an old tradition in Greek philosophy and even beyond that. It's especially present in Heraclitus and the Pythagoreans. So these were the Pythagoreans and Heraclitus were big influences on Plato. Anyway, the text declares, then we have this fact sufficiently established that all things are generated in this way, opposites from opposites. Okay, Socrates, thank you very much, Plato. But how can we imagine this, even if at the moment we can't really see how it's proven? It's an alteration like a knotting, like something becoming not itself. Think of it as a binary alternation, like an oscillation, like left on a pendulum going to right and right going to left. Or like walking from right to not right, which is left, or from left to not left, which is right, or from day to not day, which is night, and from night to not day, night, which is day, and awake to not awake, which is sleep. This brings us to his proof. In this generation, there are 2 processes, wake to not awake, and not awake to awake. There's 2 processes there. We know that also there is 2 processes. There's the process from life to death. So there must also be the process from death to life. Thus, the soul is reborn. Otherwise, all things would be in the same form. Like, imagine if there was no waking up, then we'd all be asleep. Thanks, Socrates. You got that one sorted. So anyway, we'll come back to that one. Next, he introduces another argument that has been introduced in previous dialogues. And this is, we might call knowledge by recollection. And it's quite important. but we've already prepared ourselves to understand it, I hope. You see, sensible objects, you see sensible objects, and by them, you recall their form. You see all these sets of two things, and you recall the form of two. That's recollection. That's what he calls it. Knowledge as recollection appears in other dialogues. And there is actually a reference here to a dialogue called the Memo. Now, this is a famous reference for Platonists, and it is quite a fascinating one to read. What happens is he brings up this topic of recollection, and people say, oh, come on, how can all our knowledge be just remembering what we already know? And he says, well, look, send me over your slave boy. Now, your slave boy, has he had any education? No, no, no. Does he know any mathematics? No, 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 not at all, not at all. And so Socrates then takes him through a procedure where he draws geometric diagrams in the sand with a stick. And Socrates, seems to be not actually instructing him in any way, but just asking him questions. And through that questioning, the slave boy knows how to solve the problem of doubling a square. Making a square, if you have a square of a certain area, making another square that is double that size. It's not immediately, it's not something that you could immediately work out. And we'll certainly do that, look at this when we do the geometry classes. But what he actually got the slave boy to illustrate, this is fiction, of course, but what he got the slave boy to illustrate was basically the principle, not quite there, but the principle of Pythagoras' theorem. So the entire principle behind the mathematics of trigonometry and quadratic equations and that sort of thing. So a fairly simple but idea that can then potentially lead on to so much more. So it's a really kind of nice example. And this is to illustrate this knowledge as recollection. So we were talking about two. We were talking about how I show the baby perhaps two, and then the baby recalls two things, and the baby recalls what they already know is two. And you can take or leave the reincarnation stuff, of course, and think about it another way, however you like. So next, he comes to the form of like and unlike. Remember, all these forms are opposites. Involving the form, and he shows how they all involve the form of equal, or iso, and unequal, which is a very special and elementary form. When two things are like, they are both equal and unequal in different respects. So if I say these two things are like in that they're cups, I can say they're equal in that they're cups, but they're unequal in other ways. They've got a different shape, one's got a handle, they're different colors. So this is what similarity is all about, right? These two cups are equal in some respects, but unequal in others. We know absolute equality through sensible things that are equal in some ways and unequal in others. So let me just read where he talks about this. So I'm reading another translation, and it's just to reassure people like Mira, who has got a different translation, that, it's good to read another translation, and this one's different from the main one from that we got in the Penguin. So it just gives a different dimension. But here we go. I'm just going to read from around 74a, this is. But we say there is such a thing as equality. I do not mean one piece of wood equal to another, or one stone to another, or anything of that sort, but something beyond that, equality in the abstract. Shall we say there is such a thing? Certainly. And do we know what it is? Certainly. Whence do we derive the knowledge of it? Is it not from the things we were just speaking of? Did we not, by seeing equal pieces of wood or stones or other things, derive from them a knowledge of abstract equality, which is something else? Or do we not think it is something else? Look at the matter in another way. Do not equal stones and pieces of wood, though they remain the same, sometimes appear to us equal in one respect and unequal in another? Now, when we are born, we know equality and inequality, and we remember it through observing our experience. We use this to distinguish things in our senses. That is the extent to which they reach and fall short of equality. And I'll just read another section here. This is just around the beginning of 75. Then we must have had knowledge of equality before the time when we first saw equal things, that is, before we were born. And we must have thought, all these things are aiming to be equal. Sorry, they're aiming to be like equality, but they fall short. Knowledge of forms comes via the senses, but we already know equality. This is how we come to remember the forms, how we come to remember equality and how we come to remember the forms. So, after birth, through sensible experience of equal things, we recall our prior knowledge of absolute equality. And in general, this is how we recall the forms. Can you define what equal means? Write down your definition now. See how you go. I wrote down the same. Equal, two things are equal, they're the same. What does that mean? Equal. It's a tautology. And you find you start entering into a tautology on defining tautology. So we can say what it means. We can't say what it means, I should say. We can't say what it means. Right? But we know what it means. We know it intuitively. That's a word that might help people. We know, there's a sense in which we know it intuitively. When two things are like, they are both equal and unequal. This definition gives us sameness and difference. And consider these terms in terms of representation. Getting back to representational art and the picture of you and the real you, and how the kangaroo somehow resembles the kangaroo sign somehow resembles the concept of kangaroo as in a kangaroo in itself. A photo of you is equal to you in some respects, but unequal in others. Now, consider when you're born, when you were a baby, you found equality and difference. In this difference, is this difference also equal in itself? I know my mother's face, but I see another face. Is it equal? We distinguish the unequal, and then the unequal is equal to itself. Imagine when you are born and you have all this white noise of experience. You're born, you're lying there, you hear, but you don't distinguish anything. You see, but you can't distinguish anything. It's just all this sensation. This sensation, remember, is in you. You don't cause it, but it's in you. But you can't distinguish anything. You can't see particular things. You can't hear particular things, but then you start to distinguish in your experience. You start to make distinctions of your sensations. You make distinctions in your sensible experience. You find similarity, you find difference, and the similarity in that difference. What else do you need to construct your world other than finding equality and inequality in your experience? What do you need? What else do you need to construct your world other than finding equality and inequality in your experience? Okay, so that's recollection, and that is that little section on equality and inequality coming out of likeness, looking at likeness. So it's heavy stuff, but it's not a lot of stuff. You know, it's just something to think about. Think about when you go for a walk. Think about when you're lying back on your couch. Close your eyes and think about it. And the more you think about it, the more you start getting into Plato's way of viewing. Perhaps it's not the right way of viewing, but that's the way you can give it a go. Okay, so finally, right at the end of our reading, we have this funny little argument by affinity. Okay, so Socrates claims that recollection proves that the psyche exists before birth. But Socrates has only proven half the immortality hypothesis. Now he needs to prove that psyche exists after life and that it does not break up like breath or smoke. And this is where he says, things that are compound, things that are made up of different parts, break up. But what about things that are united? They do not. And things that are unchanging, they don't change. The absolute essences are both united and unchanging. There are two kinds of existence. One, the visible, the sensible, and the other, the invisible. Our bodies are part of the visible, and our souls invisible, and so akin to the forms. So this is where our souls must belong. They have an affinity with the forms, so they must belong there. And let me see if I can find my final quote. Okay. So this is actually the quote on our website. So, and it's on D, what's that? 79D, I think, yeah. But when the soul inquires alone by itself, it departs into the realm of the pure, the everlasting, the immortal, and the changeless. And being akin to these, it dwells always with them, whenever it is by itself. And is not hindered, and it has rest from its wanderings and remains always the same and unchanging with the changeless, since it is communing therewith. And this state of the soul is called wisdom. Is it not so? Okay, so that's the end of that's out the day. So anyone got any reflections on that, or want to bring some stuff up that I left out, or questions? I'll have a cup of tea.
I'm going to throw this in and see what happens. So what you're saying is, I can't hear you, that Plato's essay, or his writing, is an argument between common ground something that we all understand to be true, and opposites, ideas which are, hot, cold, taller, shorter. So these are ideas that he throws into the mix to argue his point in the essay. Yes, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, I think I do know what you're talking about, Achilles. He's using this stuff that we're talking about with the forms, the sort of stuff we're doing in our exercise earlier in the class today. He's using this to make his case for the immortality of the soul. Now, I don't know how we all feel about. Are we convinced by the case he's made so far? Hands up if anyone's pretty persuaded by the arguments he's using.
It's one point, one side.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't find them particularly persuasive myself. And what will actually happen is there will be a plot twist coming up here, where not only is the argument put into doubt by some questions that come up from his allies, from Cebes and Simmias, not only is the whole argument put into question, and Socrates almost has to start again, but also we're brought in whether this method of question and answer is actually a good thing and whether it's working. So keep that in mind when we're discussing this. But so we can talk about the argument for the immortality of the soul, or we can talk about these opposites that you raised. And remember, I think I used, people can shake their heads if I didn't. I talked about the island and the sea as a way of thinking about this. Did I do that? Yeah, okay, thanks, Mira. Yeah, okay, so remember that. That's a good one to think about in terms of the opposites. So we say, oh, there's an island over there. And when we say it, we realize that we actually mean the island, not the sea. And so when and if I think of this cup as the physical cup, right, perhaps I could think of maybe it's made of clay, and I could think of a block of clay, and like a statue, like a sculpture, I remove everything that is not. If it's a statue of Hermes, I remove everything that's not Hermes, and I get Hermes. Like here, I remove everything that's not the cup and get the cup. So even in various different ways, in everything we distinguish, right? Concepts, islands, cups, we can say that the cup is, right, the cup and not the cup. This is not the cup, this is the cup. Not the cup's there, right? So if it was all solid, if there was not the cup, then there wouldn't be a cup. We all know that. We do it all the time, but we forget about it. What Plato's saying is this opposites thing is elementary to everything we distinguish and every part of everything that we distinguish. It's like elementary to our knowledge.
Anyone else in the group get a sense of the way, I mean, how lovely that whole section's written, and how it's almost as if Plato throws in these little problems and allows Socrates and his followers to try and solve those problems as he's going along in the dialect, in the discussion. And it's quite interesting. So he starts off with something that's obviously it's got a problem in it, and then, all right, so they talk about that, and then they can move on to another ideal, and they talk about that until they get to the final, conclusion, I guess you want to call it that. Anyone else in the group get a sense of that?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit too much for me of the other guy just going, yes, you're right. And it's usually Socrates who actually identifies the problems. It would be kind of more satisfying if his interlocutors would be the ones who would come up with the problem. Because I think
it does get a bit like that in these dialogues, doesn't it? In the early dialogues, not so much, but in these ones where he's pushing, where Socrates is very much pushing a positive philosophy.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, isn't this true? Oh, yeah, certainly. And what about this? Yeah, that's true as well. Sure. But what exactly do you mean? Well, what I mean is this. Yeah, that's right. It's like that. And that can be annoying. And people do find that annoying. People find Socrates annoying. And I know Mira finds Socrates almost as annoying as some other people in her life, which will remain nameless because we're still recording. Yeah.
I have two things I want to say, just to follow up on what you're saying. Well, maybe they're all saying yes, because he's going to die. So I just want him to get on with it. Yeah, so I didn't want to sort of, and I didn't want to exhaust him because he would have had to take too much hemlock if I exhausted him talking too much. But the other thing that I struggle with is because this is what, 400 BC, and we have so much knowledge and so much science now. I am wondering if there would be a similar dialogue now with everything that we've learnt now, with our knowledge and understanding of cells and astronomy and mathematics and anatomy.
I think that the fact that we're discussing it and debating it now in 2020 is the answer to your question.
Well, not many of us are, Achilles, so maybe Kathy does have a good point there. And a lot of people would see it this way. And I suppose there's various ways to approach what you're saying. When you take this path, there's elementary things to our knowledge that no matter how complex it gets, no matter what field you're in, they will all be expressed in that field. And we can think about that in mathematics, if you like, you're saying all the mathematics we have. You know, all that mathematics can be brought down and down and down and seem to grow out of. And it's important in mathematics that that is shown. Whether it's always shown, I'm not so sure. But this development is shown to come out of elementary things, and then there's greater complexity. So that's one way to look at it. And so it is very different from the idea, again, you're saying we have this greater sophistication. There is this notion in materialism that you might discover as your science progresses new things in a sense that those new things might challenge what is elementary here. Now, and this is well, it might challenge it, but it might just be another aspect of the form from a Platonic point of view. Now, the final thing I'd just like to say to that might help people, and I want to be careful because, you know, like, especially when you talk about mathematics, it really puts people off and that sort of thing. Or maybe you talk about computers and it really puts people off, or whatever. We will only ever be talking about things like circles and the number 1, 2, 3, and so on like that. But I will say, for example, there, Catherine, that the ancient Chinese and the ancient Greeks discovered binary, that binary was elementary. And then we forgot about it. And then when we started building computers, we mucked around and then we realized that binary is elementary. Now look what we can do with computers. Look how much complexity we get from computers, and think of the elementary principles that generate that complexity. And one of the key important elementary principles of that is the notion of binary, something and nothing, open and closed. Okay, and so what actually happened in the history of binary numbers is quite interesting, because there was the last Platonist really in our tradition, like it was the tail end of the last famous Platonists who actually invented new stuff at the tail end of the Renaissance. We had Kepler. He was thoroughly Platonist. He basically invented the mathematics that allowed Newton to have his theory of the solar system. And then we have Leibniz, who actually invented the differential calculus around the same time as Isaac Newton, right? And Leibniz decided that binary numbers, he discovered in himself that binary numbers, and that he imagined them as an image of creation. And then this was all forgotten. This elementary nature of binary was forgotten until we came to computers. And then they realized how important they were. And if you like, that Leibniz was right, that Plato was right, that the Pythagoreans were right, and the ancient Taoists in China were right.
Imagine if they were here now.
What would you say? I told you so. Let's say, I told you so.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, poor old Leibniz died lonely and loveless. So yeah, so it would be lovely to wake him from the dead and say, "Good on you, Leibniz."
Well, maybe his soul's in someone else.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Yeah. Okay. So, anyone else want to raise anything about that binary stuff, the immortality stuff, or going back to what we did in the exercise?
I think
it actually reminds me a little bit.
Go on, Anastasia.
Sorry, you go ahead, Maria.
No,
go ahead.
You go ahead.
I'll get Maria to chair. So because I sometimes aren't looking at people. So Maria is who's wanting to ask a question. Yeah. So
Anastasia.
Just some of the discussion and ideas you've presented us, Bernie, around the forms and symbolism, as well as the mathematical symbolism, as well as the linguistic and numerical truths, let's say. That's sort of what comes to me. Reminds me a little bit about the Jungian, and also the discussions around the soul and the metaphysical. Reminds me of the Jungian archetypes, like the forms, which he described as universal, and he had certain archaic sort of archetypes that he had that were actually symbols and images, and that came across in all cultures. It just resonates to be Platonic to me. It resonates of Platonism. I never thought about that before. So I just wanted to make that comment. And yeah, he talked about psychic things that that were parallel to instinct, etc. And it just sort of reminds me of this conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
That's all. That's
universal consciousness. Someone give me the term universal consciousness. The group consciousness, which is similar to the world soul, which is a term that then grew in the Middle Ages out of Platonism, the anima mundi in Latin. So yeah, they certainly are related, and I am a big fan of Jung. We can't say that he was a Platonist. He had different ideas, but there's lots of sympathies in Jung, definitely.
Thank you. Maria, go ahead.
Oh. I think there is a difficulty regarding the immortality of the soul, and whether we are convinced by how Socrates tries to approach this subject. I think that there will always be difficulty trying to prove, let's say, in a broad sense, in a scientific way, what is perhaps religious, philosophical, spiritualist. There will always be perhaps some sort of discrepancy. How can you really prove something? And his arguments, you know, he tries to make them fit what he believes. Regarding the recollection, though, it's quite interesting how in Eastern philosophies and religions this comes about in a broader sense. Like, oh, you feel that you hear something and it makes perfect sense, and then the argument comes in, well, this is proof that you must have heard it in a previous life, and that's now why it now makes perfect sense. And also in things like, oh, he or she is an old soul, or when you meet people, oh, I've got this sense that we've met before, or so it's interesting how far back this idea goes, and perhaps it was influenced by what was going about at that stage, when perhaps it was the emergence of Buddhism, you know, Hinduism, which pre-existed, what was before Buddhism. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of comments on that. The people have recognized for quite some time now, excuse me, that there was a period between mainly around the 6th century BC, the 6th and 5th century BC, where you can see in the various different civilizations across the northern world, that there was kind of this enlightenment that emerged for whatever reason, in China, in India, with Buddhism, in China with Taoism, just prior to Confucius, and in Greek philosophy with the Pythagoreans, and then Plato was a bit late on the scene. So that has been noticed for a long time. I'm trying to remember what that synchronicity is called. It's actually given a name in the scholarship. I don't remember. Now, the other comment I want to make on Maria, and thank you, Maria, is that it's probably important at this point to realize, I think we already become aware of it without reflecting on it, that in our modern world, as we know well, we do have this very strong distinction between religion and religious concepts and science. Now, when our science was invented in the sense of our mathematical science in the West by the Greeks and the Pythagoreans, the Pythagoreans and Plato, they didn't make this distinction. And so the history is quite interesting how that came about. And just briefly, we might say that Christianity came out of Platonism, competed with Platonism, and then eventually by about the 6th century, had to kind of reject it as an alternative philosophy, because, you know, Christianity demanded politically to be, through the church, demanded to be excluded. And then when the ancient Greek came back by the Arabs in the Middle Ages, the ancient Greek learning, it came back and was accepted as Aristotelianism. And so people like Thomas Aquinas, you might have heard of it, reintroduced it, but Aristotelianism and materialism was able to exist separately from Platonism, because it didn't challenge the ideas of deity and all that sort of thing. And so then what happened is we just continued like that. And it was the only way, if you like, it could continue politically. And so we've got to we got to the Renaissance, and then there was this kind of, hey, you know, Platonism and science, it's all the same, and religion, Platonism and Christianity is all the same, and yeah, let's bring it all together and it's all great. And then this was challenged. This was threatening, and it was challenged for various reasons. And in the Reformation, then this was all shut down. on both sides of the debate, on the Catholic side and the Protestant side. I'm talking in the West. I realize I'm talking to people from the Orthodox Church, but I'm talking about the Western story here. And so that was shut down. And once again, we return to this divide. So as you can see, when we're going in this class, and I don't know, some people, maybe some people who see themselves as atheists, probably feel it more strikingly, that in this class, there is no distinction. In Platonism, there is not this distinction. We can talk about computers and we can talk about mathematics, and in the next breath, we can talk about the divine. So yeah, sorry, that was probably a bit much there, but thanks, Maria. I hope it sort of helps people get a bit of perspective on Platonism and where it fits today and why perhaps it's difficult to approach it.
Does Socrates touch on that when he refers to the soul being much like God, in that when we say the word God, we know exactly what it means, and there isn't an opposite to God. And in the same breath, there isn't an opposite to the soul either. When you say the soul, it's the soul, and when you say God, is God. Does that argument come in this chapter, do you think?
Well, I would challenge that. I think God, as in the one creator in Platonism, if we go through it, it is the one. It is the one, the form of the one. It's the form of all forms, and its form has the most perfect negation, not one, which we now say conveniently none. None is a shortening of not one. So there's this opposition between one and not one, which is God and not God in that sense. So it's certainly there. And the soul has the same form. Everything has the same form according to Plato. So, and there is this particular opposition of the soul that we've come to here, which, I find a little bit discomforting, but it's certainly there, and I think I've come to a way to understand it, this opposition between body and soul. Yeah. Okay. There's one more thing I want to raise, but are there any other questions? I notice that we're getting close to the end, or comments or reflections.
Bernie, I was a bit confused about the soul and it being, was it in pieces or broken up and not whole, or have I got all that wrong?
Yeah, well, this is kind of like they're challenging if you like, a prevailing belief, and it relates to psyche, relationship with the notion of breath, that when the life leaves the body, it leaves as a breath, like you breathe your last breath. But when you breathe your last breath, the breath just dissipates into the air, and it dissipates like smoke, because you can see smoke. So you imagine smoke, it comes out solid and then it just dissipates and then it's not there anymore. So what Socrates is trying to argue here is, no, it's not that. It's not like that at all. The soul has this integrity, this unity, and it goes on in invisible, insensible way to have a continuing life, and then goes into the afterlife, and then according to reincarnation, then can relive in, I don't know whether we've got it here, but actually relive in an other human, or also animals, any animals as well. So, that classic thing like you get in the Eastern religion. That help?
Yeah, it did.
Okay. Anyone else want to just throw something in?
I just want to throw this in, and maybe I don't know. So could you make a definition that those that, because there are people that believe in a soul and those that don't believe in a soul? Yes? Is that agreed? Okay. So those that believe in a soul, would they be more akin to be religious and spiritual and follow some form of God? And those that do not believe in a soul will be more like be more like an atheist, have no belief.
You talking? Sorry, I'm just not clear. Are you talking about amongst us? I'm
just throwing it there. What's your thoughts or others?
Well, I suppose the idea of the soul, especially in our tradition, going right back to Plato and before him, is associated with religious notions of the immortality of the soul, I guess. But you could have, I suppose you could have an idea of the soul, and this is brought up in the dialogue, that it dies. We're going to get this next week, that it dies. Maybe it doesn't die every time you die, but maybe on the 10th time you die, it wears out and finally dies. It's like a cloak.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that next week, which will be lots of fun, I think. So these are the challenges that are brought up by Cebes and Simmias, that really sort of throw it out. And then we go into the framing dialogue, and the guy who's being told the story says, well, hang on a sec, I was utterly convinced. Were we? I'm not sure. I was utterly convinced by Socrates' argument. Now these people have brought up these objections, and I'm totally convinced by what they said. And so there's all this discussion, and then he goes into more stuff, and we get this. Perhaps the soul is like wearing a cloak, and so on like that. So that's going to be lots of fun next week. I think you might enjoy that discussion. I just wanted to bring up one final thing just to help. So remember when we were talking about, Plato brought up Socrates brought up the idea that, when you're born, from when you're born and you start having your experience of your senses, and then you start seeing equality and inequality, and you can, in that way, in the forms, in remembering the forms, you're reminded of them in your senses, and then you construct your world in that way. So that's kind of like really kind of fundamental, and it's when you're a baby and you don't remember it and so on. But what is helpful in thinking about this is to think about a time when you make distinctions that are now very familiar, but they weren't familiar before. Now, you might have some examples of this. I'll just give a couple. I do remember when I would go out into the Australian bush and I would say, all gum trees are the same. And now when I go out there and I see all the differences, because, I love being out in the bush and observing the gum, and I just think, how could I have thought that? How could I have seen that? Because now I see so much difference. And I even thinking now, I think, did I really think that? And so another example was, before I went to India, I thought all Indians were the same. But when I first went, and then when I went to India, quickly I distinguished Tamils from Bengalis and so on. Or when I went to Japan, I could recognize a Korean from 100 yards, whereas in Australia, I didn't know the difference between a Japanese and a Korean. So, and then you've got that knowledge, and you think, how could I have thought a Tamil was similar to a Bengali? This is just ridiculous. But you did. You had the same sense perception. Perhaps you look at gorillas have all got different faces. We can't tell the difference, but Jane Goodall could. She knew them all, So it's that sort of thing. And if you reflect on that, you can see how your sensual experience, in some sense, right, remains the same, but in another sense changes, perhaps through your construction. On Monday night, someone used the example of everyone's wearing masks now, and she can now tell the difference between all the people she works with, right, from their eyes. Whereas before she needed the mouth, she focused in, and it is amazing how we tell the difference between faces, isn't it? But if you go to another culture, another race, you can't see those differences immediately. And my last example is, you go to Aunt Agnes's farm in the country, and all her chickens have got names. And you go, Don't be ridiculous. They all look the same. But after 2 weeks, you're calling them by their names. You can see the differences because you've seen the similarity and difference. They're all chickens, but you've seen the differences between all the chickens. So I don't know whether, if we've got a minute left, if anyone has got an example in their own experience, it's a bit like that.
By Murray Bale. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
Go on, Anastasia.
All right. The beautiful example around gum trees is the novel by Murray Bale called Eucalyptus, and it's like an Australian fable, and it's just beautiful because it is actually about the diversity of eucalyptus trees, and you know, someone plants a farm with 400 species of eucalyptus and knows them all. But I just wanted to mention it's a beautiful, beautiful Australian novel on diversity in nature and noticing difference actually and celebrating it. Go ahead, Kathy.
I was just going to, sorry, Bernie, did you want to? I was going to say, when the shoe's on the other foot, I had a young Japanese student living here in my home for about 2 months. And she said to me, "You all look the same."
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was really interesting.
Kathy, the same thing happened to me. My next door neighbour's a Greek, married to a Japanese woman, and he said that his wife thinks we all look the same.
There you go.
Because I think we were somewhere and she said, "Oh, I mentioned someone's name that was at his place." And she said, "Oh, I don't remember his name. I don't remember who you're talking about because you all look the same." And I was just gobsmacked because I can sort of understand. I mean, for me, the Asian look, we might not be able to distinguish the Japanese from the Chinese, from the Korean, because they actually have certain features with the straight black hair that is common to all of them, and the shape of the eye. But for her to say that us Caucasians all look the same when there's so much diversity in our skin colour, our eye colour, our hair colour,
well,
I couldn't get over it.
Let me cut in there, Mira. You know, like you go and live there. You go and live there, and you don't have to be there for very long, and you won't be saying what you just said. They've got all this similarity. They have all the difference you like. It's all there, but we can't see it. But then when you go and live there, you can see it. And so the philosophical point here is, this is a subtle thing. Aren't Agnes's chickens going and living in Japan and seeing all the difference, and you know, being astonished that a Japanese person comes here and can't see the difference that we can see. The sensual experience, in some senses, this experience is exactly the same. And yet, when you start making the distinctions, when you learn to make the distinctions, your experience changes. So with Plato, you've got to multiply that to very elementary ways in which you construct your reality. So I'm going to leave that here now, and I'll just, what I want to do is I want to just close the class, but some people here may not know that we often have a little bit of a chat after I close the class, so you're certainly welcome to stay, and if you've got any questions, do that. So next week, I've already kind of introduced it. There's this twist in the plot, right? There's this challenge, and then we get other things brought up. So if we thought that Socrates' argument wasn't very solid up to this point, then you know, that is kind of confirmed. So thanks everyone for coming. Next week we'll get into that new part of the dialogue, and yeah, we'll see you at the same time next Wednesday. So thanks everyone. See you
Bernie.
Good night.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for making us think, Bernie.
Yes, I know.
Oh, you poor thing, you poor thing.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the broad sweep of history was amazing. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
My brain is hurting.
Good night.
Good night. See you
Bye,
tomorrow,
Maria.
Anastasia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Keep safe.
Are you hanging around, Achilles, or are we saying goodbye?
Yeah, just briefly,
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. Let me try to collect my thoughts. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of an example of what we were just talking about. As a musician, I'm often asked if I teach guitar, and they say to me, you know, should I go to the shop and buy a guitar, or will you teach me with what you've got? So I usually say, look, it's best if you buy one. What sort of guitar would you like to play? And the first question is, well, they say to me, or ask me, is, oh, I didn't realize there was a difference. So yes, it's a bit of timber, it's got 6 strings on it, but of course there are different types of guitars, you know, classical guitar, Spanish guitar, electric jazz, heavy metal, and the list goes on and on and on. So I guess that's another, not so, you know, it's just more of a materialistic.
Well, I mean, it's a thing in education all the time that you come up to, don't you? Even like teaching a language, you know, when you first hear the French just, you know, spilling off something, it just all just sounds like blah, you know.
Exactly right.
You make all the distinctions, but it's in all teaching. And so you're standing up there in front of the class, or you're teaching your student for the first time, and you have all these distinctions that they don't have, you know. Oh, that flute's out of tune, it must be cold or something, you know, or whatever. And they go, what? So yeah, and so you're all having the same experience. Perhaps you're having the same experience when you don't know about it, and then when you become a great flautist, you're having, if you like, the same sensible experience, but you're making, your world is different. Your world has changed as a musician from when you weren't a musician. It's hard to remember what it was like before you had that knowledge. Can you remember what it was like before you knew music?
I sometimes have my more experienced students turn the guitar around so they're playing with their left hand, and that makes them, it takes them right back to when they began, because they can't play a note usually. So with the guitar, you can actually do that. You can actually, in a moment, spin it, or just turn the conversation around with the reversing of the instrument, and gain that experience. But yeah, look, yeah, I know where you're coming from.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, great, Achilles. Yeah.
All right. Well, look, that was good. That was fantastic. So thank you so much.
Oh, no worries. We'll see you next week.
Yes, you will.
Kalinichta.
Kalinichta.
Yeah. How are you, Maria?
Good, thank you. I really enjoyed the article. I don't know. I don't know whether you got my email.
I just saw.
Apologies. It's I had a look and I just corrected some typos. I mean, I did not correct them. You can see it. Struck changes.
Yeah. Oh, great. Right.
Which were typos, but one thing. You have the Macedonian king Alexander.
Yeah.
I sort of put Alexander the Great. Let's not go.
Oh, okay.
You know, does Bernie thing, or the Platonic Academy of Melbourne, that you know, Alexander the Great is not Greek. You know, I know where you come from.
Oh,
but there
are
some elements.
No.
I thought no.
No, it was. I just tell you, it's just the rhythm of the sentence didn't work. So yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah. So a couple of things, and I really like the image that you have on the card, which is really the Platonic Academy. And if you put, I don't know how many images you can put, but I thought that by putting that in the article, then people connect to the Platonic Academy classes, because they will see the same image. And I agree with you. Yeah, maybe the Parthenon or some ruins in Athens, just again to relate it to the Platonic Academy, and definitely put something from pagan, because that's what it's all about. I mean, how it emerged. And with the patriarchs and the saints and all that, I couldn't resist. So I sent them a very Byzantine. I mean, there are plenty on the net. Please, don't have to use that. But I believe that Saint Gregory the theologian, or Nazianzinos, he's also known like that, who was not in Nicaea, but he was in the Second Ecumenical Synod in Constantinople. He was one of the last lot to go through the academy, like Julian. He was actually buddies with Julian and the apostate, and he was a buddy of Theodosius II. So I got those 3 ones.
And he's related to you, is that right?
Well, I mean, we're all related. We all come from the amoeba, right? I mean, that's what the family believes, and as I said, there is always a priest since the 300s, 175, and some tradition, but it's a matriarchal family. Go figure. So yes, and also those three hierarchies, which were part of the fathers of the church, they're also regarded as very learned and patrons of knowledge, if you like, schools, universities, and things like that. So you can make them association if you like.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. So did you send a couple of images and
I sent one image of that, but look, I mean, there are plenty in the net, and
okay. I can. Oh, great. Oh, lovely. Oh,
there were archbishops of Constantinople. Vasilios, St. Basil was, St. Gregory was. They were all like that. So.
Let me just say a couple of things, Maria. Firstly, I haven't looked at your corrections, but I now that one thing you need to know about me is that I'm actually dyslexic, and so when I change my words around, I don't notice the endings. I read them, and if there's an S on the end or it's supposed to be,
right. Oh, well, I couldn't have. There was no way that came through.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right.
Through the writings.
Yeah. So that and it's great you use track changes, because I haven't trained David to use track changes. But with your scientific background, of course, you would be using it all the time when you're comparing. You're updating documents and everything. So that's great. But
it's a necessary evil.
Yeah. But what did you think of the? I've got to send it to him, because I haven't actually seen an article of Neos Cosmos. I haven't seen an example of the actual printed newspaper yet.
Right.
What did you think of the tone? And is it,
Look, I like it. It comes across as very learned one. Look, I'm not one. I think it's good for people to be challenged and to have another view there. And please, for the course, put the Aquinas, put them the other side, the Western Church figures as well. I thought it was really.
It wasn't too
really good. I don't think
it wasn't too highbrow. What's the expression? It wasn't too
no, because there are people like that. There are people like that who want to read something and say, oh yeah, people will see it. The priests, I don't think that they will be offended because, my God, you write about the Son, the Father, and the Holy Spirit, and the Creator God, and things like that, and the atheists and maybe current pagans would like what you said, because oh yes, it did come from that there was influence from that, and we are safe because St. John is there, and that's how you start and that's how you end. So I don't think that there's going to be any excommunications from local priests and stuff like that.
Well, maybe we want a scandal, because that'll give us more publicity.
Well, careful about what you wish.
What you wish for, yeah. There was I'll remove the Alexander of Macedonia. Yeah, there was the appeal to Greek nationalism.
Well,
was it too strong?
No,
he is Greek.
Well, look, as Greek Australian, the right amount, okay.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, but, our church is better than yours.
Look, no, yeah. Let's not go there. I mean,
okay.
I love studying religions and things like that, but I'm not. Look, what I believe is the answer. I mean, what is truth, huh? So,
can I ask you a very particular question about the Orthodox Church?
Yeah.
Okay, so. Do you use the word liturgy in the liturgy, in the Mass, in the service, right?
Yeah.
Is ancient Greek used at all? Or is it modern Greek? Is it all translated into modern Greek?
I wouldn't, I have to look that up. This is a good exercise.
Do you have a modern Greek Bible? Because what I'm wondering is, like when it's translated into modern Greek, does it say in the beginning was the Logos?
And archi in Logos. Yes, I remember that by heart, but I will look it up. And this is now, remember, there is nothing in our church in modern Greek. Okay.
Sorry, there's nothing.
The whole Mass, if you like, everything, it's in very old language.
Oh, okay. So a lot of people won't understand it.
No. A lot of people do not understand, and unfortunately,
that's my answer.
Some priests still, or the Archbishop still believe that the sermon. I mean, they write a sermon and they use not exactly the language of the church, but a very old language that you have to go to school to.
Okay. So you're saying that when they give the sermon, they don't use New Testament Greek. They use something in between or something.
1800s,
right?
1700s.
So the equivalent is the King James Bible with these and that.
So I'm very happy to see nowadays the service conducted in 2 languages, and also a few predominantly in English, so people can understand what everything is all about. Because that language that the service is written in, it's almost ancient Greek. You know, it's the language of the 400 AD.
Right.
It's very old.
From the time of Gregory, the language of the mass of the service, the main service, and the whole hasn't changed. That's what you're telling me in a normal church. In a normal church.
Yep.
But now they're starting to move towards using modern Greek and using
not in Greece, as far as I'm aware. Not modern Greek.
Yeah.
Things perhaps are becoming a little bit better here because they use the English language.
Right. So if a modern Greek person goes to an Orthodox church in Greece, and they will hear the entire a normal service, they'll hear the entire service. Let's forget the sermon, the entire service in the ancient Greek language of 300 AD or whatever. Okay,
yeah,
that's great.
For 400. I mean, the time of those actually 3 people, because they, amongst them and a couple of more fathers, they actually wrote them the mass, the liturgy.
And so a lot of young people, if they hadn't been exposed to the church from childhood or whatever, if you just imagine they knew modern Greek well, they would not understand the service.
It's very difficult.
Yeah. Okay.
It is very difficult.
Right. Okay. Oh, that's just helpful because I'm kind of I'm really switched on to the West and the whole Western experience, and just knowing that about the Orthodox experience is helpful. So that's
yeah.
great.
I don't know what's happening now in Greece. Yeah. I haven't heard that there is a mass in modern Greek.
No, that's just.
But here it's very yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great, Maria. Thank you for that little bit of knowledge. That's wonderful.
That's all right. Can I ask something, please? For next Tuesday.
Yeah.
About the winged charioteer. How long do you want me to?
Oh, well, how long do you think it'll take?
Oh,
say 10 minutes. I don't know.
Okay.
There is quite a bit to it, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean,
I'll say 10 minutes. But if it's getting really long, well, let me know.
Yeah, I'll okay. So I'll aim for 10-15 maybe.
Yeah.
In the worst case scenario. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
See how you go.
All right.
Are you looking forward to that?
Yeah. It will be interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Good.
It will be interesting. I like the idea. It's also quite poetic. In some cases. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Well, if we need to swap notes, chat before that, we can do that early next week. Just give me a hoy and you can tell me if you got any issues about length or something. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. See you later, Bernie.
See you later. Thanks for coming tonight.
Pleasure. Bye.
Yeah.